So, today we're talking about capital without cognitive infrastructure because it faces significant problems. Capital, whether it resides in institutional vaults or in family offices, capital without cognitive infrastructure faces significant problems. That's the central thesis. So I think really we all understand what capital is. We don't need to be expert in that. Let's move forward and talk about what we mean by cognitive infrastructure around capital. That's the important bit. And there are several components of it. Here are some things that it includes. It includes data architecture, so the ability to collect, integrate, and access relevant data across disparate systems. This could be numerical data, it could be quantitative data, or it could be qualitative data. Now, lots of organizations and different in sectors such as retail collect data really well, and they integrate qualitative and quantitative data really well. So data architecture could be one of the first things that we're talking about when we're talking about cognitive infrastructure. A second component of this infrastructure that we've started to talk about today is analytical and predictive capability. And this is really about tools or models really, I suppose, that convert data beyond knowledge into insight. A good word here is perhaps hindsight. Rather than relying on hindsight, converting it into insight so that there can be some foresight, some predictability. And thirdly, of course, we've got to have artificial intelligence and automation. Subtle difference between the two, which I won't bother going into here, that's for another day. But essentially, technologies that speed up, enhance views on pattern recognition and decision precision. And I think critically for this component, it may not be, and it probably won't be, perhaps for the deepest insights, an AI system off the shelf. It probably needs to be some sort of bespoke element to the institution or the family office where the capital resides. But it's not all about artificial intelligence and predictive analytics. Institutional memory, capturing that institutional memory of successes, of failures, of knowledge, experience, of things that worked in the past. That's what we mean by institutional memory, sometimes referred to as tacit knowledge. And I think critical for this is creating, for cognitive infrastructure, creating a organization which can be considered to be a learning organization, where the individuals and the institution or the organization are always learning. You're always in the learning zone and developing systems of learning so that there's human judgment, the ability to interpret ambiguity, make trade-offs, and be discerning. And all of that brought together perhaps with into a decision system, processes that govern, using this cognitive infrastructure, govern how decisions are made and executed. So we can possibly think of other things that may be part of this cognitive infrastructure, but that's, I think, one, it's a good start, and it sort of starts to reveal what we mean by having a cognitive infrastructure. There are reasons for having this. I'm briefly going to outline these, and we'll go into these in much greater detail in the future. Some of the reasons include, number one, complexity has really outpaced linear thinking, and a cognitive infrastructure would make sure that complexity was better understood, better discernment was exercised by the individuals. As I say, more on this in another topic. And speed, I think this one we could all recognize, and it needs little interpretation right now. Speed has become a strategic variable because of artificial intelligence and other models and tools that work at incredible rates of speed now. Another thing we can think is that information is even more abundant than it ever was, but somehow, even though information, and we have bucket loads of information, we have vaults and data centers of information, 10x of 100x of information compared to just a decade ago perhaps. But we've seen the opposite in terms of insight. Insight has become much more scarce, and errors, because speed has become this strategic variable and insights are rare, insights are more scarce, errors scale much faster than ever. And so without this cognitive infrastructure, let's return to the first statement. Capital without cognitive infrastructure faces significant problems. There's some, hopefully we're gleaning some understanding in these short minutes about what we mean by cognitive infrastructure, and therefore the reasons why capital, wherever it resides, faces significant problems. But there's an added problem of building this intelligent system around capital, and that is, well, how do you do that? How do you build data architecture, predictive and analytical capability, artificial intelligence and automation? How do you build all of that? I think one of the answers is something called ambidextrous leadership or ambidextrous thinking. Very crudely and simplistically put, ambidextrous thinking is about simultaneously maximizing exploitation, what we already know, what's efficient, what's worked, and exploration, innovating. Not either or, not sequentially, but simultaneously maximizing those two traits. There are great success stories of ambidextrous leaders and ambidextrous thinking. There's a lot of literature in academia. It formed part of my research as well several years ago. Let me briefly explain in these next few minutes, and then we can cover this at another time as well, what the benefits of using ambidextrous leadership as really the engine of building a cognitive infrastructure, an intelligent system. So let's just look at some of these. Firstly, it would allow us to see in two directions at once, a sort of clear view of current performance, what's working, and a continuous scan of emerging possibilities, what might work in the future. And this sort of dual awareness prevents complacency and distraction. It sort of ensures that this cognition is anchored in reality, but also open to change. Perhaps most importantly, it's about structuring tension, not eliminating it. I just want to emphasize that. It's about tension, but not eliminating tension, but structuring it. Some of the tensions we talk about are efficiency or innovation. There's a tension in that. Stability or change, a tension, short-term or long-term. These are tensions. But what ambidextrous thinking and leadership does is to ensure that these tensions, because they're real, are not eliminated, they're structured. Ambidextrous leadership designs systems where these tensions can coexist simultaneously, but more importantly, perhaps productively. So there's no trade-off between data and intuition, that tension between data and intuition. They can coexist productively. Model versus anomaly, experience versus experimentation. I think in the next couple of minutes, I just want to highlight another couple of things. Again, we can go into these in greater detail. Ambidextrous leadership, ambidextrous thinking gives us the ability to become learning institution. It's hard to become and remain a learning person, a learning organization, an institution without some sort of mechanism to be a continuous learning organization. And if we are able to do that, then this is where cognition really compounds. Perhaps I can end with this as the final element of ambidextrous thinking or ambidextrous leadership. And it lies at the integration, not the substitution, but the integration of human and machine intelligence. I often talk about AI as being intelligence augmented, or augmented intelligence rather than artificial intelligence. What I mean by that is this, that the expert, the finance expert, for example, or the operations expert, for example, in a family office or a institutional capital organization, these people are experts. You are experts. The purpose of AI, through becoming a learning institution, is to augment your expertise, not to substitute your expertise with AI. Perhaps on this episode, I can leave that there. We've talked about capital without cognition. Infrastructure faces significant problems. We've talked about what that intelligent infrastructure comprises, and we've talked about the methodology of building that sort of infrastructure through ambidextrous leadership. We'll be covering these topics in greater detail on a weekly basis. So please join me next week. Thank you so much.